Okay, on to chapter 2. Now, if you looked at the slides from chapter 1, let me remind you that I said chapter 1 was kind of an introductory chapter to the book and to the series, to the class. Chapter 2 is when it really gets serious. You're going to have to start studying here and pay attention to concepts. And I'm not subtle about this, so I will be bringing out some of the things that you need to pay close attention to, okay? So starting with chapter 2, let me remind you, here's what your strategy is. You're to read the online materials. Occasionally there will be some exercises at the end of chapters. And what I'm trying to do is just give you a voiceover. If it's not resonating with you while you're reading, hopefully these videos will help. So without any further ado, let me just jump right into this and talk to you about the concept of property, what it means to own property. Now, we're actually going to start out fairly deeply because even though this slide looks very simple, it's very, very important. When you own real property, you often hear people refer to as the bundle of legal rights concept. In other words, in chapter 1, I mentioned the idea that you own land, you own improvements, you own rights and privileges. In other words, it's not just one thing, it's this bundle of rights that you have. So when we talk about your ownership in real property and we talk about the bundle of rights, it automatically includes this. What I mean by is if I had the property, if I own the property and I sold it to you, you now have this bundle of legal rights. Let's take a look at the first one. The first one is going to be the most important. Notice on the right-hand side of your screen there that it looks like there's a bundle of sticks, the bundle of legal rights. Get it? And I know you can't read it because it didn't come out very well when we printed it, but if you like mnemonics, this is an example of another one that might be helpful for you. The bundle of legal rights is symbolized by using the mnemonic DEEP C, D-E-E-P-C. And here's what those initials stand for. The D stands for disposition. If you own real property, I promise you that you have the right to dispose of it. So let me tell you what I mean by dispose of it. You could give it away, you could sell it, which that's what we're here for, right? It's a real estate class. So that's going to be the most common thing that we're going to do with it. Or you could use it as collateral for a debt. You have the right to dispose of this property if you own it. Now, this is actually going to be very important. You probably will forget that you heard it. So I'll bring it up later when it's important. But if you own real property, you have the right to dispose of it, but you can only dispose of that which you own. For example, the house that we're sitting in right now, Lisa. Lisa, how do we own this house right now? As tenants by the, do you remember the word? Entirety. You're muted, by the way. Tenancy by the entirety. In other words, Lisa and I, and you don't need to make a note about this right now because we're going to talk about it in the upcoming chapter. Lisa and I own this property as tenants by the entirety. It's not like I own half and she owns half. The marital entity owns the whole thing. Well, guess what? I can't sell my half because I don't own my half. Lisa and I own this together. The marital entity owns the property together. So when I say you can dispose of property, you can dispose of that which you own. If we were in tenants in common and we both owned half, I could sell half, she could sell half. If I had a right to fish on the property, maybe I could sell the right to fish on the property. So here's what I want you to remember. The right to disposition, if you own real property, I promise you, you have the right to dispose of it, but only that which you own. I'll put an asterisk beside that because it'll be important when it comes up a little bit later. The next one we look at is if you own real property, you have the right to enjoyment. And notice that I put parenthetically there, the right to quiet enjoyment. In other words, enjoyment, quiet enjoyment doesn't mean anything like what it sounds. It actually refers to this. The right to quiet enjoyment means that you have the right to own property without an expectation that someone's going to have a superior right in that property. Now, what I mean by a superior right is when you buy property, there's a real good chance someone has owned that property before you. Okay. So when I'm buying the property, the attorney and the paralegals, what they're doing in the background is they're doing a title search. If you haven't heard that word yet, it'll come up in chapter 3. But when they're searching the title, what the attorney is looking at is the person who's selling it to Chris. How did they acquire the property? Well, they bought it from Joseph and Sue. Well, how did Joseph and Sue acquire the property? Well, they bought it from Sam and Michelle. So what the attorney is doing is looking back at these series of conveyances to make sure that each one of those had the legal right to own the property and sell the property. All the signatures are in place, et cetera, et cetera. Why is the attorney doing that? Well, because each one of those people had a superior right to me. They owned it before I did. So if that superior right was not erased, so to speak, by a conveyance, then they could come back and say, hey, Chris, we still have a right to the property. We want you off the property. So what is quiet enjoyment? It's the reasonable expectation that my ownership will not be interrupted by someone coming along and expressing a superior right. How do I get that peace of mind? I pay an attorney to do a title search. That's what they're doing, is making sure the person who sold it to me had good title. And if they did, I now have good title. Bundle of legal rights. The last three are fairly simple. When we talk about exclusion, exclusion is actually a very basic tenet of all property. What that means is if I own property, I have the right to exclude others from the property. I can literally say, you can't come on to my property. And if you did, you'd be trespassing if I were to say that. So that applies actually to all types of property. I own it. I have the right to exclude others from enjoying the property. Okay. The right to possession means that you have the right to occupy the property, and closely associated with that is the right to control the property, the right to use the property. So you have the right to occupy it and you have the right to control it if you have the legal rights in that property. Now, in regards to control, it means you have the right to use it for any legal purpose. Now, again, let me focus you on what I mean by legal purpose. I live in an area, my home right now is a single family residential. Well, I have a right to use it as a single family residential. I don't have the right to build a quad on my property or an apartment because it's not zoned for that. So every time I talk about legal use of property, what I'm saying is you have the right to use it what it's zoned for, or you have the right to use it for what your restrictive covenants allow. That's all we mean by that. So the bundle of legal rights, whatever I own, if I sell the property to you, you now have that those legal rights. It includes land, improvements, rights, and privileges, all these rights that run with the land. Okay, much more serious concept than what it seems like it would be coming right off the bat in chapter 2.